to open the meeting with roll call, please.
Yes, Chair Bauer,
Here.
present, I see. Vice Chair, where am I? Corey?
Here.
Thank you. It's been a while. Board Member Kohler? Here. Board Member McKinnon? Here. Welcome, Board Member Shepherd. Board Member Wimmer? Here. Board Member Bernstein?
Here. Great, thank you.
Present.
Imagine, it's the fifth time we've met this year, and we're at the end of September. I'd like to welcome Debbie Shepherd as our new member. We're finally back to full capacity, and we look forward to her contributions. Let's move quickly to oral communications. David Carnahan.
Thank you, Chair Bauer and board members. David Carnahan in the City Clerk's office. I am here to share with you the city's current recruitment for boards and commissions. We're currently looking to fill 3 positions on the Architectural Review Board, 3 positions on the Parks and Recreation Commission, and 2 on the Planning and Transportation Commission. As you know from your service here, or Debbie, as you're going to learn, these are great ways to give back to your community and help make an impact on the Palo Alto community. The positions are all for 3 years, except for the Planning Commission, that is a 4-year term. Applications are due October 17th at 4:30 p.m. And applications can be found on the city's website, cityofpaloalto.org/clerk. So again, Architectural Review Board, Parks and Recreation Commission, and Planning and Transportation Commission. And board members, your homework is to reach out to at least 2 community members that you think might be a good fit for one of these bodies and encourage them to apply. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. I don't think there are any changes, additions, or deletions.
None.
Okay. Looking at the schedule of future meetings, as I mentioned, we've only had 4 this year. It looks like there are only 3 more that we will have, possibly. And I'm just wondering if is anything in the pipeline?
There are no applications that are due to come to the HRB other than today's application that I am aware of.
So possibly, since I know you have all kinds of free time, we have some pending things, the Mills Act. If you can find the information that Emily Vance developed with Margaret and Brendan and myself, that's a possibility. And I'd like to get the ITT site on an agenda, not necessarily this year, but certainly in January. Okay. I'd like to try to move this forward as quickly as we can. I have to leave at 10 o'clock, but I think we can, in an hour and 15 minutes, we can get through the rest of our agenda. So the first action item and the only action item on our agenda is 1107 Cowper Street. It's a request for review of an individual review application for consistency with Professorville Historic District design guidelines. Project includes the demolition of an existing 2-story home and construction of a new 2-story home. Environmental assessment is exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act in accordance with guidelines section 15303, new construction. Zoning district is R1, single-family residential. Planner Graham Owen, who is here today, is the project manager. So, Graham, you're up.
Thank you, Chair Bauer. Yeah, as you mentioned.
Excuse me, I'm sorry to interrupt. Just a reminder to turn off cell phones so we're not interrupted by the public. Martin?
Yeah, Chair Bauer, I see that this is listed as a quasi-judicial, so perhaps it'd be good to go through every board member to see if there's any issue with that.
Oh, any conflict?
Correct.
I don't, does anyone have a conflict? I mean, you'd live closest to it, but I don't think you're.
Or disclosures. Conflicts or disclosures.
Oh, conflicts or disclosures?
Maybe having met with an applicant.
Well, I'll disclose that I've walked by the building for the last study session and did again walk by it this week to look at the site and look at the surrounding buildings.
I guess I drove by originally when we were working on it.
Okay, I rode my bicycle by the house this week.
I've driven my car past the house.
Okay,
And I've been in the neighborhood many times.
all right. All right, so all of us appear to have been in the neighborhood and taken a look at the building.
Actually, it came before our board at
exactly,
one point, so we all saw it.
Okay,
Yeah.
disclosure's done. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Graham.
No, quite all right. My fault. It's okay. So yeah, as I mentioned, my name's Graham Owen. I'm with the current planning staff. Been working with the applicants on the house that's before you today. So this is 1107 Cowper Street. It is an individual review application, and I know that individual review applications don't come to the board very often. So I'll just give a kind of a brief overview of this type of discretionary application. Generally any two-story house that's in an R1 zoning district in the city goes through the individual review process. This is a discretionary process by which the city looks at the potential impacts of a house on the surrounding properties. So it's only for two-story homes. We don't send the one-story homes through this process, but we have individual review guidelines that we use to evaluate massing, scale, neighborhood, streetscape appearance, and privacy in particular, as well as landscaping. And so we look at the application in light of the guidelines as well as the more standard R1 zoning regulations, and then the director makes a decision on the application. This project is unique in the sense that it's located in the Professorville Historic District, and it proposes to demolish an existing house that was constructed in 1997. So the house is not considered a contributor to the district, given that it was constructed outside of the period of significance. However, new homes that are proposed within Professorville are evaluated against the Professorville Historic District Design Guidelines, which were recently adopted. And so those, among other things, have guidelines that are specific to this type of application, which is a new residence, so hence why it's here before you today. So the application, as many of you remember, was previously reviewed before it was actually considered a formal application in April of this year, and in a non-binding study session, the HRB provided feedback on the application. Yeah, so as I mentioned, the house is not considered a contributor to the district. However, new homes need to be compatible with the district, hence why it's coming before you today. And so the role of the HRB is to make a recommendation to the director as to whether or not the house as designed would be compatible with the district and not have an adverse impact on the district. This is the streetscape frontage, the front of the house at 1107 Cowper Street. The lot is nearly an acre in size, so it's a relatively large lot, building constructed in 1997. Zoning district is R1, which is the standard zoning district throughout the city for single family. And the comprehensive plan land use designation is single family as well. Here is a parcel report showing the lot in relation to its surroundings. It's located mid-block between Lincoln Avenue and Kingsley on Cowper Street, and right across the street from the Presbyterian Church. Its shape is unique, as you can see. Most of the frontage is on Cowper Street, but then it does have this little flag that sticks out onto Lincoln Avenue. So the existing home and the accessory structures that are on the site, the pool, for example, those are slated for demolition and replacement with a new single-family house, as well as accessory structures, an ADU, a detached garage, and another accessory structure as well. This is the house that's proposed. It follows it's got a double gabled facade, as well as a longer section down the middle that runs parallel to the street. Materials, shiplap, as well as shingle siding on the upper floors. You have a number of features. You have the chimneys, dual chimneys, as well as shed dormers and front-facing gables that add articulation to the facade. These are the east and the north elevations, just kind of showing the wrap of the building all the way around. So we did have M Group, which is one of our on-call consultants, prepare an evaluation of the project relative to the Professorville guidelines, and so I've included that report in the staff report for your review. In general, the application is, we would say, consistent with the guidelines. There is one important one where it's certainly not consistent, which is that the guideline, one of the guidelines says that we should avoid the demolition of existing buildings. Obviously, the demolition is proposed, however, it's for a 1997 construction building, so it's outside of the period of significance. The building that's there currently is generally consistent with kind of the character of Professorville, though, so there is kind of a question about that. However, the other guidelines that seek to ensure that the new residences are that are compatible with Professorville in terms of its landscaping, in terms of its materials, scale, massing, staff feels and concurs with M Group's determination that it is consistent with the guidelines. So with that, I'll leave it at that. I know the applicant has a presentation as well, but we are recommending that the HRB determine that there would be no adverse impact on the district with this application and find that the project is therefore exempt from CEQA under guideline section 15303.
Thank you, Graham. Are there
If you
any
have if you have any questions for me, I'm happy to
Yeah, I was
answer.
just going to ask if there are any questions at this point from staff? No. Okay, so applicant presentation?
Hi, my name is Kristen Lomax. I'm with Fergus Garber Young Architects, and I'm also here with my colleagues Nick and Catherine, and we comprise the architectural team for this project. We're here today to present to you 1107 Cowper Street, which is a new single-family house in Professorville, and we want to take you through sort of how we got to where we are with the design and the history of the site.
Excuse me for interrupting. Could you move the mic a little closer to you?
Sorry, can you hear me?
That's much
Okay.
better. Thank you.
Okay, so one of the first things that we did on the project was to do a little bit of research on the original site. This is a picture of the carriage barn that was there in kind of the early 1900s. And then a brief history. Okay, geez, I cannot read that. Just give me 1 second. Okay, a brief history of the site. In 1905, there were 3 lots that were purchased by a Stanford professor. He built a house in the 1920s, which is, those photos are shown, the original house is in a shingle style. Unfortunately, in 1959, that house burned down. And then from the 1950s to 1996, that lot actually remained vacant and was used as a community garden. Then in 1997, the house that's currently there was built by the Stevens family. So one of the next things that we did when we were working on this project was we researched Professorville pretty intensely. Our firm has been pretty fortunate. We've done a couple projects, but we wanted to take kind of a deep dive into Professorville. So this is one of the diagrams from the design guidelines that shows when various houses were built. So you can see our house is labeled in kind of the dark blue color, which is one of the later periods, so from 1980 to 2013. And then if you go to this next diagram, you can see again in dark blue, the style of those houses tends to be in the neo-eclectic, neo-traditional, or contemporary styles, which is kind of a minority if you review the neighborhood. The majority of the houses are the dark green color, which are shingle style, colonial revival, Queen Anne, Craftsman, or Prairie. So we kind of came to the conclusion that although our house does sort of fit in with the neighborhood, it's a minority in the style. So one of the things that was really important to our clients was that it fit in with the neighborhood. So this is the existing house at 1107, built in 1996, 1997. So when we first started the project with the owners, we looked at either doing a remodel or doing a new house and kind of weighed the pros and cons of those. So one of the things about the existing house is it has a partial basement with kind of small light wells. And the new owners really want to have a full basement for their family with light wells with egress requirements, all that kind of stuff. So that was one issue. So if we wanted to keep this house, we'd actually have to lift up the house and put in a new basement. A second thing that we looked at is the second floor. So this is the existing second floor. It's kind of hard to see from this diagram, but these rooms right here, these L-shaped rooms, they're labeled as storage, but they're actually bedrooms. So you can see sort of from the front elevation, this little dormer here. The volumes actually create these very low ceilings that aren't that usable as bedrooms. So again, if we wanted to keep this house, we would have to completely remove the second floor and the roof, build a new second floor in order to get actually usable bedrooms. So these are a couple photos from the second floor. The right-hand side is the long hallway that kind of connects all the bedrooms, and then the left one is one of those L-shaped bedrooms, and you can see the window's quite small and the ceiling is quite low. So after that, we kind of came to the conclusion that doing a new construction was the better approach because it would actually take us a longer construction period to make all those changes to the existing house rather than just doing a new construction. So that's sort of beneficial to the neighbors to do a shorter construction time. So this is a front rendering of our proposed design. We want to take you through some of the design elements on this. And in the preceding slides, I'm going to show precedent images of houses in Professorville. So it'd be really helpful if you turn to A0.0 so you can compare our design to these precedent images as we go through. So after our study session in April, we actually hired Page and Turnbull to help us make sure that our design matched with the Professorville neighborhood and sort of analyze our elevations and give us suggestions. So in each one of these slides are actually quotes from the memo that they provided to us. So Page and Turnbull noted that many of the houses in this neighborhood have wide gabled roof forms, projecting bays, and are 2-story in height. And our proposed building roof form references forms found elsewhere in the neighborhood and is sized to complement the building's proportions, which is demonstrated in this house on Melville. So both our house and this other example draws upon the architectural influence of the First Bay tradition, which is blended elements of the stick, Queen Anne, and shingle styles. Through the use of shingles and siding, the combination of intersecting gabled volumes, modest molded wood details, and textural variation, the design incorporates compatible architectural features and materials while remaining differentiated from historic buildings in the district. And these are all quotes directly from Page and Turnbull, so. The proposed wood exterior trim and details provide modest interpretations of classically referenced architectural details. These materials recall the common usage of natural exterior materials, which inform the overall design of numerous contributing buildings within Professorville. The proposed building's floor levels, eaves, and upper roof line are consistent with those of neighboring buildings. The muntin configurations chosen and the window dimensions are proportional to the proposed building scale, while forming a balance of solid to void, which represents design precedents of contributing buildings within the district. And then in reference to our front entryway, the proposed arch entrance and paneled wood door with side lights respond to features of precedent buildings in the district, particularly those designed in the colonial revival style, and are clearly modern interpretations which avoid false historicism. So then Page and Turnbull did an analysis of the existing residence for us. I don't want to read this entire thing for you, but I'll kind of summarize. They basically said that the existing building is not removing a contributing building, and it does not reflect the development patterns or architectural trends associated with the early development of Professorville. It was designed prior to the creation of the design guidelines, which Page and Turnbull were actually the ones who created those design guidelines. And they said the residence design, footprint, massing, fenestration, and architectural style are not particularly compatible with the Professorville Historic District. Then when they were reviewing our proposed design, they wrote the following. The proposed structure's general massing characteristics, fenestration featuring clad wood sash windows, and exterior cladding are modeled upon with very common early architectural styles in Professorville. The building provides a modern interpretation of these styles while remaining clearly differentiated from the district's contributing residents. This avoids false historicism or conjectural design and enables the building to complement the district's architectural character more than the existing building. So the top image is the image that we presented to you in our April study session, and then the bottom image is what we're presenting to you today. So we've taken feedback from you, and then we've also taken feedback from Page and Turnbull, and we've made the following changes. We eliminated the brick wainscot, which was around the home, and instead changed to a wood belt course. We lowered and further refined the arched entry porch and detailed it a little bit further. We updated the dormer over the front porch to have windows which are more consistent with the rest of the facade. We also reconfigured some of the first floor windows and changed the configurations. We refined the chimney design. And then finally, we weren't completely clear on what the wood material was going to be, and we're now sure it's going to be a wood shingle roof, which fits in with the Professorville neighborhood. And then finally, as Graham mentioned, the city hired M Group to do a study, and they wrote the following. It is the opinion of M Group that there would be design benefits with replacement with the proposed residence, as it would provide simpler, less complex architectural elements that are more consistent with the existing historic architectural styles within the district and with the design guidelines, which were not in place when the existing residence was built. So thank you for listening to our presentation, and let me know if you have any questions.
Martin.
Thank you, Kristen. Can you go back to page 15, please, of that report? Thanks. Page 15, thanks.
Yes. This one?
Yeah.
15 of our packet?
No, 15.
Oh.
She has it on the screen right now. Great.
Oh, there, okay.
Great, thank you.
Did you have a comment, Martin?
No, I just wanted to make a copy of it. So.
Oh, all right.
Thank you.
So I have a question for you. Do you know the date that this property was purchased by the current owners?
Recently, but no, I don't know the exact date.
Was that before the Professorville design guidelines were established?
When the new owners bought it? No, it was after.
Okay. I'm going to ask a couple more questions while my colleagues gather theirs together. I notice on the front, page A0.00, the dormer that's over the front door on the second floor, is,
Sorry, I just want to look at the same thing you're looking at.
so in this view, it looks like there's a relatively substantial detailing around the top or right above the windows. And yet on your elevation A 3.00, it looks like it is significantly different. Are these developed? I mean, I'm not quite sure what's going on there. I understand this is a very reduced set of drawings, and it's early.
I think you're referring to like the dentals and the wood trim that's happening.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's dental because at this,
Yeah.
30,000 foot level, it's very difficult to determine what's going on there. But I'm just wondering if you could describe which of these drawings is depicts what,
What's happening?
yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So the one on A 3.00 is correct. The one that you're looking at on the screen is maybe a little bit different. We've added a couple more pieces of wood trim, but for the most part, it's the same. And the pieces that are underneath the eaves, that is kind of a wide white wood trim, and then it's got dentals underneath that, which if you look at this image, this precedent image, it's a very similar detail to that house.
Okay, let me ask a different question now. I noticed that the accessory buildings at the rear of the property are very close to the property lines, and yet this building has, this site is almost an acre. In fact, I think the pool house encroaches on the rear setback, and I presume that's allowed by zoning.
Yes, that's allowed.
Is there a reason why these have to be so close to the side yards and that, especially the entertainment room? I think that's the term you used on the drawing, the one on the right rear.
The recessory, yes.
Right, which I would imagine would generate some significant noise if you're entertaining.
Can I speak one thing about that? So there's a very large oak tree which is on the site. If you look at the site plan, it's shown with this kind of large dotted line. So we needed to be very careful not to disturb any of the roots. So that really
So
drove.
what page would we look on?
If you look on A 1.11 would be a good example. So you see the tree on the rear half of the lot with the dotted line. So that really drove putting those two structures sort of in the corners in order to avoid the root structure.
Okay, but you have a substantial porch deck or something, even if that's not an impermeable surface, certainly could be smaller and the building could be moved away from the side yard. I'm thinking about the impact that these buildings have on the neighbors.
I understand. We did hire an arborist, and we also had the city arborist come out, and we were trying to determine exactly where that building could be located, and they almost pinpointed to the foot where we could put building. So the deck that you're looking at is not going to affect that root structure because it's going to be on sort of a pier situation. So we can't move the building any closer to that tree.
Great, thank you. Okay, Martin, let's start at your end. You have any questions?
I don't have any questions for Kristen, thank you.
Margaret?
I don't necessarily have questions. I might have comments.
I think that would be part of discussion, so Brenda, question?
Yeah, last time you were here, I had asked about about the delta between the shiplap siding on the first floor and the shingles on the second, and asked to see some examples of that. I walked around the neighborhood and still didn't see any. I live a couple blocks from here. And I didn't see any on these images. Were you able to find any? I actually think both materials individually could be consistent. It's just the delta between the two. It was specifically mentioned that shows up in other places.
So I believe that these examples do have them. I'm sorry, it's kind of hard for me to see from here, but I think this one and this one both have shingles on the second floor and siding on the first floor.
So this is new, so I don't know that one. That one's,
I know it's kind of hard to see with the plantings, but yeah, these.
this one does, you're saying, on
yeah.
363? Okay. Okay, yeah, that's it, thanks.
Roger?
I have a modest question. When you look on A3, it's the front of the house. 3.00. And somehow in my world, when you have a long house like this that's got a hip roof all the way across, so at each end of this home, it's a serious block. So when I make the ends a hip roof, and it reflects the shape of the dormers in the roof there, tends to me to kind of finish ending that the house is done. Where when you have hip roofs like this, you're never sure if it's done or not, because you can just add on to this home very easily. There's no end in the house.
Are you saying we have a gabled roof currently, and you're suggesting a hipped roof?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, that's just kind of my thought when I
Okay.
work on the homes in that neighborhood. We usually try to, I don't know, to me, it looks like it's never ending, but when you put the hip on the end, that's the end and that's it.
Okay.
But just my own weird kind of thing, so. That's all. That's all
Okay,
I'm
thank you.
commenting on.
Michael?
Are we just on questions right now? Or?
Yeah,
Questions?
comments. Well, I made comments, sorry.
I guess the
And they're
question.
laughing at me next door.
Are they? Shame on them. I guess the question would be more, I'll blend my comment into a question. On the front entry on 3.00, the way the house kind of sits on the ground right here, in most of these older homes in the Professorville district have a porch. They have steps leading up to a porch, and it's elevated from here. This is kind of squatting and sitting right on the ground.
So we do have steps leading up to a porch. There are 2 steps up to the porch in the center.
But it's not elevated. The whole facade, to me, the image is kind of just sitting on the ground rather than being elevated with a few steps up to a porch, which gives a more consistency with what the other historic homes I see in Professorville. I think in my eye, it would be more compatible if it rose a little bit off the ground. And
Higher than it is shown. you mean?
perhaps have
Yeah.
windows that went into the basement that gave you that elevation. Yeah. If you kind of follow what I mean.
No, I do follow. The only thing I can speak to is the height restrictions are always tricky. So you're always kind of balancing between raising the house up too high versus hitting the daylight plane versus that sort of thing.
Yeah, it just looks to me like it was sort of truncated prematurely. It should rise with some steps going up to a porch and be more consistent with the rest of the Professorville. I think that's a question blended into a comment.
Okay, I'm sure we'll get back there.
Okay.
Anything else?
No, that's it.
Debbie, you have a comment? A question?
Yeah, I have 2 questions. They're very brief. I can see, I wasn't at the study session, but I can see that you have altered the arched roof over the porch. In your research, did you ever find an example of a porch roof like that in Professorville?
So we found arched features in Professorville, but not an arched roof exactly like that. So it's sort of a modern interpretation.
So in the guidelines, the overarching theme is that your design should be compatible yet differentiated. And I think you've done a really nice job, and Paige and Turnbull has done with you to explain how you think this is compatible. What do you see as the most significant differentiation you've made as an architect today
On this project?
on this house?
I would say the arched roof, you've hit on one of them. It fits in, but it's definitely clearly differentiated. We're using very similar materials to the existing houses, but maybe in a little bit of a different way. We're also using a little bit more modern windows. I mean, the windows in Professorville tend to be all wood. We're using clad, so it's a little bit more modern in that way. I'm gonna go to, I would say that covers it.
Thank you.
I have one follow-up question about the front facade. I find A3.00 to be a more helpful view of the house than the rendering on the front page, in part because on the front page, your rendering has eliminated the view of the lower portion of the building. But what I was noticing on that page is that on the right-hand side of the building, there seems to be a wide band that travels at a smaller scale across the front porch. But then on the left-hand dormer, that disappears. Could you talk to me about what the design idea is there?
So between when we submitted for IR, which was about 2 months ago, and today, we've actually changed that, so that wide band actually goes all the way across. We kind of recognized that there was no reason for it not to, and it creates more consistent look. So the same wide trim band that you see on the right gable is also now on the left gable.
Okay, thank you. If there are no other questions, then I think we'll bring this back to the board and have a discussion and then create a motion. Actually, I have one question to staff. I noticed that the height limit is 30 feet, and then there is a third floor equivalent. And that's not the top of the roof. What is that? Can you explain why we're not seeing what the height is? I realize we're under the height limit, but can you talk about it?
So it comes, third floor equivalency is kind of this wonky term, but basically it's this, this term that we use for describing additional floor area above a certain limit. So once you reach a height of 26 feet above finished floor, then in most circumstances, you're going to be counting that area, even if it's just additional roof space towards your gristle area a third time. So the project includes some areas that are considered third floor equivalencies.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, so Martin, would you like to begin?
Yeah, thanks. Kristen, you mentioned, I know it's coming back to the board, but I just have one more comment for Kristen for interaction. Let's see, I didn't look too quickly at everything. Are you at the maximum FAR right now?
We're close, but we're not completely maxed.
Right, yeah.
Yes.
Responding to one of the other suggestions of if the house was raised up higher, then you end up getting more second and third floor
Yes.
equivalency,
Yes.
and that might blow the floor plan here.
Yes, you've
So,
nailed it, yeah.
Yeah, so one idea, I think, again, responding to Board Member McKinnon's idea about if it looks like it's sitting on the ground, there's the architectural term of plinth. People are familiar with plinth? Yeah. So you start to have a suggestion of a plinth detail on here. You've got the shingles up above, and then the horizontal boards on the first floor. And then right below that band, there's like about 30 inches or so, something like that. So if that detail got more clearly differentiated between the wall above that molding, you're familiar with what I'm talking about, right?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, so if maybe that water table detail, whatever we're going to call that detail, if that became more pronounced, then that might help differentiate between the wall above and then the familiar, some indication of being a plinth. That might address then Board Member McKinnon's idea of that looks like this building is just sitting on the ground. So that just might be just a detail clarification when you actually submit for building permit there.
Okay.
And then if the other suggestion you heard from a board member or comment about putting on hip roofs on the end, that would introduce then a third type of roof shape here. So right now you've got the shed dormer in the front and then gables. If there was a shed, gable, and then a hip, maybe it starts adding a little more visual confusion of like, what's the structure of this? So that's why I would support the gable ends as you're presenting.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, no other questions. Thank you for the presentation. We'll probably want to ask you other questions as we
Do you
get
want me to
into
stay
our
here then?
discussion.
Okay.
Yeah, but please have a seat.
Okay.
You don't have to stand up.
Okay.
Thank you. It was very, very informative. Okay, coming back to the board. So discussion. Martin, would you like to start, or did we jump around?
Well, I'm prepared to make a motion, but I'll hear other comments first. I can start with a motion if you like, or maybe there's other board member comments first.
All right. Anybody have a comment? Margaret?
I can't.
Your light's on.
Sure, I'll make a comment. So, I mean, I think this is definitely further developed than when they presented it the first time, and I really appreciate the fact that they went to Page and Turnbull and had it looks like a very good observation that was summarized in a report. I wish we could have had a copy of that, because I think that would have been kind of an interesting report to be able to have as part of their application. But they clearly listened to what our comments were during the study session, and they certainly applied a lot of took note and applied a lot of our comments and incorporated it into their design. I guess the first time that they presented, I think we kind of stumbled over the fact that they were going to tear down a house, which is against the Professorville guidelines, and it's not a sustainable approach. But I think in the end, if we viewed the existing house and the proposed application, which is more suitable for Professorville, and I do believe that the proposed new project is more compatible with the existing nature of the architecture in Professorville. So I think that tilts us to a positive reaction. I'm just sitting here and really appreciating a lot of the details that they incorporated into the revised design, like the diamond glass windows up in the gables, and when they have the upper level that has the shingle siding, how it has that bowed. I know there's an architectural term for it because I've had a project with it, but it kind of bows out, and then there's a nice molding underneath it, and then it goes to the horizontal siding. I'm appreciating that. The only thing about the arch in the front, I just feel like it just seems like, for me, just my reaction of the composition of it, it just seems like it's maybe too flat and too broad. So there's some kind of probably a correct dimension of what that needs to be. It just seems like if you could lift up that arch 12 inches, it would announce itself more as I'm an arch, instead of, well, I'm kind of flat and I'm trying to be an arch, but I'm not. I don't know. You know what I'm saying? I think it would be nice if we could lift that arch up a little bit so that it reads a little bit more clear that it's an arch. I think in this slide that's up now, it just seems too flat. It doesn't really have the prominence, because that's your focal point. And then the other thing, I'm not super crazy about the shape of the chimneys, just how it goes up to, it goes up to the roof line, and then it curves in. Usually I see that kind of chimney style where it's wide and then it narrows before the roof line, and then it's narrowed up to the roof line. So I think it looks like you're using brick for that chimney. I think maybe if you could take another look at, there's some great examples of really beautiful chimneys and how they're very simple, but at the top, the brick coursing kind of steps up and down. And even if you went straight up with it, make it prominent and make it really cool and use that aged brick. I mean, I think that could be an improvement. And then I just had one other comment that's not really historic related, but on the garage, I'm just looking briefly, I was looking at the garage and the roof line of the garage. It looks like you have a double gable that faces the house. Between the house and the garage, there's two gables, so you have a valley, and with water, you can have a lot of water that's going to be pouring between the house and the garage. So, and I was looking on the grading and drainage plan, it doesn't look like there's any provisions for taking care of that water, and maybe, I was thinking maybe you could either flip the roof line of the garage and have the water going away, on the side of the house. Maybe you could have a rainwater collection system, that would be kind of cool. But I know that's not historic, but I was worried about the water. And I think that's pretty much it.
Thank you. Brandon?
Yeah, just a couple comments. First of all, in general, I tend to like the flow, also kind of the design and the existing roof line, as along with what Martin said. I think that the hips would be too many roofs on this project. I also want to second or third the idea of a plinth or some sort of investigation into that sitting above grade, because that is obviously really common, and that it does definitely look very flat to the ground. And my only other comment is I do like the diamond pattern on the windows. The windows look a little bit small to me on the attic windows. They were bigger last time, and I actually liked them being a bit bigger. I think now they look kind of almost silly, so to speak, because they're so small. But maybe it's just the way it looks here. But you might want to look at that, because I think again it's common to have bigger windows to let in more light in attics in the area. But other than that, I also agree with Margaret. I think, in my view, the tear down this property or this proposal does fit in more with the neighborhood. And given that the existing house wasn't a historic house, I'm okay proposing or going forward with the demolition and the plan. Thanks.
Okay, Roger, comments?
I have there was a discussion earlier of the arch top as you come in. I think they have it, we should have asked them, but does arch tops after 12 feet count as floor area? So that's probably why that's down low where it is. And I think if you thicken it and leave it at the height, it's probably going to look okay, but that's the problem, because that whole porch gets counted. So, other than that, I mean, it's an interesting house. It's going to look, one reason I suggested that the hip roofs at the end is that this is huge. It's going to look like a very large home. And putting the hip roofs at the end, I think would lessen that impact. It may even emphasize more the middle of the house and the entry rather than the large gable roofs at each end. Well, that's pretty much it. So, I don't know quite how you solve the 12-foot high and not counting, but it's up to them.
Michael?
Evaluate 18 under the pros and cons. The conclusion pretty much is a toss-up, the way I read it. They consider the benefits of retaining an existing structure demolition can be disruptive to a historic established streetscape. But then in the following paragraph, they said that the proposed design is more consistent with the existing historic architectural styles within this district. So they give it to you both ways. And I think, in my reading of this thing, I think the current proposed design is more consistent with the existing historic styles of the historic district. So I would go with the last paragraph on page 18 as being what is more appropriate, which is what is being presented here. And a second comment I would have is that I see no reason why you couldn't shingle side the whole house rather than having the top half in shingles and the bottom half in some other style. But That would be my take. It would be more consistent with what you see in the historic district. And the third comment that I already talked about was the fact that, in my view, the house looks like it's squatty and sitting on the ground. It should be elevated a few feet, maybe incorporating some windows that look into the basement. That would give you the benefit of additional light into the basement. And you could have a modest porch up there that, if you take perhaps 3 steps up to a porch, it would be more in keeping with the Professorville designs. So I think that's my 3 comments.
Thank you. Done your.
Fine. I had to point to in term. The first one is going back to the arched roof. It says very specifically that the roof form of the porch should relate to the roof of the overall residence. I don't want you to, go too far in your historicism, but everyone seems a little uncertain about how that arch has been resolved. I just, in general, I feel like if you're going to do this, this house has to be a lot better than the one that's there. And it should be an important statement about how you can build a modern house in an historic district. I mean, this is a real opportunity. It's precedent setting possibly for Palo Alto. So I'm not really concluding one way or the other what you should do about it, but that's why I was interested that you feel that this is the thing that differentiates the house. The other issue that the guidelines address very specifically had to do with hierarchy of windows and with fenestration in general. So when you changed this design, you really shrunk the windows on the lower left. First of all, the guidelines say to avoid randomly assigned size and type. I don't know that you have to have, complete balance here, but at first glance, it seems rather random. These revival styles hark back, and, in the beginning, your most important rooms would have been on the ground floor at the front. What you now have, I think these windows actually speak to the functions in the house. And that's something that we have to all sort of get our arms around today. The most important rooms apparently in this house are 2 bathrooms and a home office. And in the 18th century, actually, you did have your home office in that front room there. And it's kind of cool that to me, that's what differentiates it, is the way that's treated. And I do think bringing it across, I'm glad you pointed out that you've changed that, but we didn't see that. I think that'll help. But it's strange to have 2 little windows underneath. And the 2 little windows on the top on the right are kind of strange. That's a guest room. You could actually make them 3 across, but then you've really got to beef up what's going on the lower left. So basically, the guidelines just say that hierarchy from top to bottom in terms of type and size, working up from the base, is important. And I think that's worth revisiting. Thank you.
I basically share almost all of the comments made by my colleagues. I have been troubled since this first came to us that there are 3 roof styles. I can't understand why the arch is on the front. I like the rest of the building, but I just don't understand why it's there. And as Debbie just pointed out, it's not in conformance with the guidelines. I would like to have seen the details on the front facade, the dental molding and all of that, because I think that could have a huge impact on what this building will look like. So I'm sorry we don't have that today, and it makes it difficult for me to make a positive decision about this. Also, I would like to say that raising the finished floor more than a foot above grade, I think will improve, as my colleague Michael has pointed out, will improve the front facade. There's lots of room in this building to have another couple of steps, get that up, because they're very, very tall ceilings on the 1st and 2nd floor. And again, fireplaces, I understand that there are fireplaces on both floors. But the first thing that my eye caught was the mass of those fireplaces, which, by the way, on the rendering, you can't see the one on the left. It's best seen on page A3.0. Finally, what troubles me most about this project is that there is a clear guideline that says existing buildings, even if they don't contribute in Professorville, in the historic district, should not be torn down. And while I understand the description that has been presented, and I do think this building looks better, I just do not like the fact that people, after the guidelines have been published, and we worked very hard on them, that somebody comes in, buys a property, and immediately wants to tear down an existing building. That's exactly what the guidelines say you're not supposed to do, and that is very troubling to me. So let's, on that note, let's entertain motions.
This is not a study.
Motion.
I'm taking Wimmer, comment arch. This history a lot from Palo. And the arch is somewhat compatible in detail to the rest of the detailing of the house. And when I look on the renderings, it looks like that's probably the thinnest member, and yet it's the front entry orientation of the house. So if there's some way that detail can have a little more mass to it rather than being what I'm perceiving to be the thinnest element of that, I think that'll be more integral with the house design. I'm also taking good counsel from the comments from Board Member Wimmer on the chimney. If you look at the presentation up on the screen right now, the upper drawing shows the same dimension of the chimney going all the way up. One of the architectural analysis is that this is combining some of the different styles, including shingle style influence. There was reference to the book of the American Guidelines history, some similar title to that. There's also another book specifically about the shingle style. And what's common of all the fireplaces in that guideline, in that booklet, shows the chimney similar to your top rendering up here, where it's the same dimension all the way up, rather than adding your proposed shape of the chimney. So those are actually revisions to this design that I would recommend. I don't know if we want to interact with the homeowner or the architect by that point, but those are my comments in sympathy with Board Member Wimmer's comments.
The way we could handle those comments is to incorporate them into our motion, whatever motion that is.
Yeah. Did Board Member Wimmer have a comment?
Can I just say one thing yet? So I forgot about that 12, unfortunately. Do bigness of porch trim, horizontal entire width of the front elevation. If you incorporated that porch beam thickness and you went from where the top of the arch, or excuse me, the top of the column meets that porch beam, if you take that point and strike it up to the current underside of the arch, which is probably your maximum height, I think that alone, it would raise the height of the arch. It just raises it with the width. I think that would make a huge difference because you're working within the parameters. I think that's what's missing. And I think if they did that, I think that, and with that white, that white painted trim, I think that would be beautiful. And it would lift up the arc, the radius of the arch. I think that would be an improvement.
Okay,
I have a quick question.
Roger.
In floor where it says,
A3, right hands to do this, and 7, yeah, it's a 10-foot.
no, it says that's the floor area is 10 feet.
Right. The next, it's probably, that's how they'll probably, yeah. Okay,
I'd like these points to comment, but I'll propose a motion that the house design is approved subject to the alteration of the thickness of the entry arch and the shape of the top of the chimney agrees with the top rendering on the screen here. So it's a consistent dimension all the way up, rather than having it get narrower as the chimney arrives. And that with those conditions that the house be compatible with the guidelines for Professorville.
So can I, could,
I would also like to include in the motion that the detailing to emphasize a plinth is more visible.
okay, so
More pronounced.
I want to be clear what your proposal is about the placing, or
That's up that rendering?
it's the top of,
Yeah, where it's
So
the same dimension all the way up.
So for clarity, the one that was on the top was the iteration formal.
So design word proposal. I'm sorry. Front,
Yeah. Can I investigate examples of, so square, like architect is very talented and,
let me interrupt here.
Sorry,
We
I
want to
guess-
have we don't have a complete second? Okay. Here,
is that on?
no,
I wanted to make a friendly amendment to Mark's motion. It's very dense. If they could sting brickwork detailing, that would make those top of those chimneys really remarkable and complement their design.
acceptable, Mark?
acceptable, but not distract from the overall form of the house. Yeah.
It's just as we're
Right.
this a little bit more specificity about,
Sure.
what, for the applicants.
Yeah.
So, one, chimneys be to make this doable for all the other people that have to do this, could I
Right.
suggest that these details come back to the board on a consent calendar? Is that see what we're not seeing today, and then it's not, I find that it's a little ambiguous what we're
Correct.
trying to do here.
Yeah, sure, I said, yeah.
And it would, we add that, will you add that to your motion then? That it would come, these details would come back to the board?
Yeah, I think that,
Margaret as a second? All right.
About patients of that I thought.
so
concerns
if it gets elevated, I heard from the applicant that that would trigger more equivalent. Yeah,
Can I interject? Couldn't they just raise the basement ceiling height? And I think this basement doesn't count if it's 3 feet
36.
above, 3 feet above grade?
Yeah, the question though is if you're increasing the height of the basement, you can increase the height of the basement up to 3 feet above grade. The measurement of third floor equivalency is from finished floor, so you're allowed 26 feet above finished floor before you have the third floor equivalency.
And they could also, I guess we're just raising we're not raising we're just raising the floor. So the basement's either, the basement ceiling is either getting taller or we're pulling the building out of the ground a little bit more. So it shouldn't change the FAR, raising the house
So
up.
third floor is not measured from, third floor equivalency is not measured from grade, it's measured from finished
The
floor. So-
interior finished floor,
So
yeah.
theoretically, yes.
So all that'll stay the same. We're just pulling it out of the ground a little bit more, raising this basement ceiling height, which could be nice. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it makes more steps up and down.
I think the,
Sorry, can you come up to the mic? Thank you.
So if we make that suggestion, we would be decreasing ceiling heights in order to achieve all that. So if we bring the floor of the basement up, the ceiling height of the first floor will decrease due to that. Does that make
wait,
sense?
Is it staff, I just thought staff said that if you bring the first floor,
your mic.
finished floor elevation up, that it's that finished floor that develops the third floor equivalency. Is that correct?
So you're suggesting to increase the height of the overall building then?
right, so I think there's two assumptions. One, if you do increase the finished floor elevation, I think the assumption has been that you would increase the total height of the building, so everything above finished floor would go up by a foot or
Yes.
so. The other assumption is that you shrink down the plate heights by that equivalent amount to keep the overall height of the building essentially the same.
Well, the overall height's 4 feet under the allowable limit. And
Correct.
even though the buildings I built never got close to the allowable height, I think there's room to raise the building, especially on a property this large, without a detrimental impact to the neighbors.
There's one other thing to think about, though. You come back to this question about the 12 feet that's permitted for the front porch. So that's measured from grade as opposed to from finished floor. So we're dealing with a constraint there in terms of that feature, and the impact of that could potentially start to squish things in a illogical manner.
Well, from my perspective, losing that arch would provide a solution to that so that your front porch doesn't end up generating more finished floor area and then, go through your allowable limit, and it would improve the look of the building. But that's not, I think, our issue here. I mean, I think what the board is trying to do is to modify the building design, if I'm understanding the comments made, so that the building actually is more in character with the Professorville guidelines. And if I'm mistaken in that, please let me know.
What, can the staff answer, what is the, or the applicant, what is the height of that arch above grade? I don't see it on my drawing that I'm looking at. I mean, is it less than 12 feet?
It's not dimensioned.
We maxed it.
Huh?
We maxed it, if that.
Oh, it's at 12 feet, yeah, okay, yeah. Okay, so then that would, yeah, so if the arch, you heard the condition of, the proposed condition of the motion is that the arch just gets a thicker band on it here, so. And then, okay, and then working on that plinth detail. So if the building got raised up, then that arch would have to be counted toward additional FAR, yeah. So.
Okay, I have to leave in 12 minutes, and I think we're circling back here. Broderick, a quick comment?
I just have one. We have 10 to 15 new homes underway with basements in Palo Alto, and basically all the basements, the floor ends up being 18 to 20 inches above grade, if that much, because the higher you get, you're in the height limit, you have daylight plane issues. So I'm not in favor of encouraging them to raise the first floor up if that's what you're trying to do, because it's just not going to work.
Okay. So we're going to do.
Where are we with the motion?
Is that going to be part of your motion, Martin?
Yes, we can see those details, and then we can vote on that.
Including raising the finished floor?
If we raise the finished floor, then we have the 12-foot arch detail problem, right? Yeah.
It sounds like it doesn't work.
It's not our issue. It's the client's issue and their design team.
Yeah.
I want to be clear about that. If that's not part of your motion, fine. Let's move to the next phase.
Yeah. Well, my part of the motion would be to get that arch not to be a thin detail, but a thicker detail. Yeah.
I'm still trying to get at whether or not you're including raising the finished floor.
I would say I'll propose not raising the finished floor because of the FAR.
Okay, so we're looking at modifying the details on the arch, the chimney details, and the dental molding. That's the substance of your conditions?
Because, yeah.
Hold on,
please.
1 second.
Yeah,
I'm
yes.
trying to get the motion so that when we can move to amendments.
Yes, as long as that plinth detail is pretty well pronounced, then I'm satisfied with the height.
Okay, I'm going to take that as those are the 3 conditions. Now, Debbie, you had a...
Since they're going to come back to us? Okay. Would you consider asking them to look again at the randomness and hierarchy of the windows on the facade? I'd like to see them consider going to 3 windows that match on the right-hand side at the top and beefing up the 2 windows on the left below.
Thank you, Debbie. Are you referring to page A 3.00?
Yes.
Okay. So I understand the 2 main gables, 3 on one side and 2 on the left, 2 on the right. And then what was the other 2 windows you were mentioning?
If you do that, then the 2 windows on the bottom left
I see.
the volume of them, I think, can be increased. And I think those 2 changes could be made without altering the design within those rooms.
Okay. All right. Since the applicant is here, would that affect on the lower left of that page A 3.00, if those windows got larger, would that affect the function or your intention for the building?
Well, you can see on the top, when we presented to you in the study session, we did have a bigger window at that time. Our only intent was to make the windows more consistent, so we had less window types. That's why we changed it.
Right, okay.
So,
Okay, I'll accept board member, what's your last name? Shepherd's recommendation for modifying or reviewing those window patterns.
Okay, is that acceptable to you, Margaret, as the seconder?
Yes, it is.
All right. Any other comments? Do we have any need to discuss this further?
Is there a date when this would come back to us?
Just whenever.
I think when we get the plans, then we
Right.
can advertise. It's not that short of a turnaround. We have now a new newspaper that we post in that doesn't have the same deadlines.
Okay, so if there is no further discussion, I think we all understand the motion. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Aye. Okay, so it's a 6-1 vote. I'm not supporting this motion because I do not like the fact that the demolition is involved. I have no problem with the rest of it. I simply don't accept, if we have a guideline, we ought to ask that the people who buy properties abide by them. So that's why I'm opposing this memo. All right. Thank you very much for your presentation. A lot of work, improvement. We'll see this project again. So going back to our agenda, I want to move through this as quickly as we can. The next portion is approval of minutes. And I spent several days going through the minutes. I have a number of small changes to the minutes that I think would make them read more coherently because some words are left out, and I'm just wondering if I could just give them to you, or do we need to actually talk about all of them? Okay. I'll
I'm
just
okay with your changes.
Yeah, I mean, they're really small things like adding a word like SHPO, for instance, that's not clear to people who don't know what SHPO is, so I think it should be spelled out. And there are not many. So if no one else has changes to the minutes, can I have a motion to approve?
I move to approve the minutes of February 8th, February 22nd, April 26th, and June 14th.
All right, second?
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
I'm going to abstain because I wasn't in attendance at those meetings.
It's fine. Okay, there are no subcommittee items. I'd like to have subcommittee items, but we don't have any. Any comments or announcements by board members? Debbie, you had one?
I just wanted to mention that there's a National Trust meeting called Past Forward that's taking place in San Francisco November 13th through 16th. So you can go online and look at the programs that are offered, but I think some of them seem relevant, possibly, and they certainly seem interesting. So I registered, Robert helped me, then the city very generously covered those expenses. And so I encourage anyone else who would like to join me to do so. It's called Past Forward, and it's sponsored by the National Trust for Historic Preservation.
Yeah, California Foundation.
Yeah.
Preservation Foundation is also, I think, participating.
They're probably participating, yeah.
You can see it on their website, I think.
I also responded to that and will be attending. That'll help satisfy our required annual training also.
Well, I think many of us were at the May presentation,
Okay.
and that probably works. But anybody who hasn't done one of those needs to before the end of the year, I think. Any additions?
No other announcements.
Good. All right. If there are no other comments, I'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you